Welcome to our virtual textile trail around Huddersfield. My name is Julie.
And I'm Lorna. I'm standing in today for my colleague Carol, who you may have seen in our trailer, and you'll see her in a minute in some video we recorded earlier. We'd like to thank all our colleagues at Huddersfield Local Studies and Reference Library who contributed to putting this together. And in the background today, we'll be supported by Frank Grombir.
Hello.
Hi, Frank, who will help with images and any questions or comments. If you do have questions or comments, please add them next to the broadcast on YouTube, Facebook, or Twitter. Or you can write to the email that's on the screen below now. We'll try and answer some of your questions in the middle of the broadcast and at the end of the virtual walk.
This trail has been created in collaboration with Discover Huddersfield, whose website allows you to explore several other trails. Huddersfield has developed an international reputation for the quality of its textiles and particularly its woolen and worsted materials. There's so much we can say about textile industry in this area, so we've chosen to limit ourselves to a few key sites in and around the town centre. Here is the route of our virtual trail, and we will use Google Earth to move from place to place. The trail starts on Market Street, at the site of the old Cloth Hall. We walk along Market Street to Railway Street and into St George's Square. From the square, we will walk down to Northumberland Street for our next two stops. It is now quite a long walk. We have to cross the ring road to Quay Street at Turnbridge. Then it's a gentle stroll along the Canal towpath to the tunnel under the busy Wakefield Road at Astley Basin, bringing us to the towpath that runs alongside Firth Street. Our trail takes us along the length of Firth Street to Queen Street South for our final stop.
Carol will start with our first destination, which played a role in the early development of textile production when cloth was still produced in individual homes, perhaps with the use of small fulling or scribbling mills in the valleys around. I'll share it now so you'll be able to watch.
The growth of the textile production in the Huddersfield area relates to climate and environment. The steep grasslands of the Pennine hillsides, unsuitable for farmland, proved ideal for grazing sheep. The soft, lime-free water was ideal for washing the wool and later for powering the machinery. Here we are on Market Street, and this is where the Cloth Hall stood. As you can see in this image of 1928, the Cloth Hall is in the bottom right-hand corner. It's a round or slightly oval-shaped building. And it relates to the early textile production. It must have been one of the busiest venues in Huddersfield on Tuesdays, when all the local clothiers came from far and wide to sell the material they had spun and woven in their weavers' cottages. The cottages were scattered throughout the hillsides of the surrounding areas, like this one in Almonbury Village. They are recognisable by the row of mullioned windows on the top floor, which provided maximum light for the clothiers to do their work. Previously to the building of the Cloth Hall, the traders had gathered near the parish church of St Peter's, and this is where they displayed their pieces of cloth, often using the gravestones to lay them out on. Piece being a local term for a length of cloth, approximately 45 inches wide by 100 yards long, so roughly 90 metres. The Cloth Hall, built in 1766 by the 3rd Baronet Sir John Ramsden, was a red brick building, and brick having just become fashionable. And it must have really stood out against the majority of buildings in Huddersfield, which were in local stone. It was originally just a single-storey building, and there were no windows on the outside. to help with security. The main entrance faced down Cloth Hall Street, and it stood proud and was topped with a cupola, an open bell tower, and also a clock. There appear to have been around 150 stalls, used by possibly some 600 local clothiers. A quote from Bain's Directory of 1822 states that here, in brisk times, an immense quantity of business was done in a few hours. Individual clothiers travelled on foot or by pack horse from as far afield as Slathwaite, which was 5 miles to the southwest, Penistone, 13 miles away, and even Saddleworth, 13.5 miles over the Pennines. Eventually, with the growth of the Industrial Revolution, large-scale production moved into the growing number of mills in the area, making the individual clothiers virtually redundant. And by 1870, it was almost empty. The cloth hall was used for other purposes, such as a temporary market and a newspaper room, until it was finally demolished in 1930. And the town's landmark of the domestic woolen industry was replaced by an ABC cinema. The only parts of the building which remain are the clock tower, belfry, cupola, and the plaques, which we see here have been re-erected in the grounds of Tulsa Museum.
So here we are in St George's Square, where we can acknowledge the part these wonderful buildings played in the growth of Huddersfield and district textile industry. The opening of the railway station helped to stimulate growth of trade and commerce. Here we have an image of the design for the Huddersfield railway station by the architect J.P. Pritchett. The first train to arrive on Platform 1 was in August 1847, and the station was completed in 1850. When we step out of the railway station and look around the square at the imposing buildings, we can first see on the left the George Hotel, in front of us the Lion Chambers, and to the right, Britannia Buildings. Lion Chambers was built by the woolen manufacturer Samuel Oldfield in 1852-3 as a grand arcade housing shops with wool warehousing above. Britannia Buildings was built in 1856-9 as warehousing for George Crossland and Sons, woolen manufacturers and merchants. The grand designs of these buildings disguise their practical uses as offices and warehouses, giving the impression of wealth and prosperity to any visiting buyer or merchant, who could merely step off the train and be admiring the wares of the various businesses within minutes. This 1887 road insurance plan shows the layout and occupation of the buildings. Approximately 23 different textile firms are in Lion Chambers, Britannia Buildings, Station Street and Railway Street. By 1901, the Huddersfield Street Directory listed 64 different textile firms, including manufacturers, agents, merchants, wholesale clothiers, tailors, woolen shippers, officers for manufacturers, and of course, warehousing. The growth of the industry can also be seen by the number of people employed in the 1911 census. The occupational statistics show that in Huddersfield alone, there were 26,000 employed in the textile manufacturing and dealing industry, of which over 16,000 were in the woolen and worsted trade. So we are now leaving the square to our next two stops on Northumberland Street. So here on the corner of Byrom Street and Northumberland Street, we have Dugdale Brothers & Co Limited, a long-standing firm of cloth merchants. They will be celebrating their 125th year in 2021. In their own booklet, they describe themselves as fiercely independent and proudly British. Dugdale Brothers is the last cloth merchant remaining in the centre of Huddersfield the town that created worsted. Their Made in Huddersfield, England label, which we saw at the beginning of the trail, has become a distinctive hallmark for quality. They proudly claim that all worsted cloth production is carried out within a 20-kilometre radius of their head office here at Dugdale Towers. The company is now exporting to more countries than at any time in its history. The firm was established in 1896 by two brothers, Henry Percy and Frederick Herbert Dugdale. They began their business as wholesale woolen and trimming warehouse men. Before moving to the former post office building here on Northumberland Street, they had premises at Market Street and then moved to Railway Street and Station Street. And here on this lovely picture of the Dugdale brothers on Northumberland Street, we also have a lovely view of Huddersfield Town football supporters queuing for trams to take them down to Leeds Road. We're now going to move further down Northumberland Street to the Mechanics Institute.
And here we are at the bottom of Northumberland Street in front of the Mechanics Institute building. The origins of this began in 1825 when the Huddersfield Scientific Mechanics Society was set up, funded from local donors and subscribers. After several name changes, the meeting venues, by 1861, the Mechanics Institute, as it was now known, was in a position to have its purpose-built headquarters here. The idea came from a few employees of wealthy export merchant Frederick Schwann. Schwann played an important role in the organisation. He became the first president and went on to be a generous subscriber and benefactor. And as we can see here inside this chemistry lab, it looks quite sophisticated for its time. Forward-thinking businessmen like Schwann recognised that with the increasing technical procedures and complicated machinery involved in the textile process, that the town would benefit from educating the working classes and increasing their skills. From a list of occupations in 1847, at least half of the 400 students who were studying at the Institute had trades related to the textile industry. And here we can see some spinners just taking a break from their work to have the photograph taken at the beginning of the 1900s. There were 27 spinners, 14 dyers, 58 finishers, and 12 wool sorters listed, along with, as we can see here, 41 weavers. The figure on the second from the left, as we can see, looks like quite a young boy, about 10 or 12 years old, operating the heavy machinery. Frederick Schwann desired that the young men of the town should have the educational advantages denied to many whilst they were children. The organisation remained in this building until 1884, when it moved to the very impressive Ramsden building on Queen Street South, which is now part of the University of Huddersfield campus. By this time, the organisation was called Huddersfield Technical School and Mechanics Institute, and it amalgamated with the Huddersfield Female Educational Institute, which was founded by Henrietta, the wife of Frederick Schwann, in 1840, maybe the only one of a very few in the country at that time for women. Huddersfield Technical College developed into the Polytechnic, and this achieved university status in 1992. In 2016, the University of Huddersfield recognised the contribution of Henrietta and Frederick Schwann and named the Central Services Building after them.
So here we are on Quay Street. This Grade 2 listed building was built as a textile mill and is one of the very few still operating as a textile mill today. The building was completed in 1846, and we can see the date stone at the top of the building. The mill was originally tenanted to various different companies and trades. The present owners, J.L. Brierley Limited, took ownership of the mill in 1895. J.L. Brierley had been trading as Hagan Brierley at commercial mills in Firth Street before the business moved here. At that time, the floor was tenanted to a rag dealer. The third floor was tenanted to J.R. France, a cotton doubler and winder, and the remainder of the building occupied by Hagan Brierley. In 1898, Mr. Haig left the company, and J.L. Brierley bought out J.R. France's doubling and winding machinery and made him manager of the mill. At this point, there was 125 members of staff. I'm just going to read to you a snippet from J.L. Brierley's 1993 centenary booklet, which gives us a wonderful insight into a mill owner's typical day. J.L. Brierley opened his mail at 8 a.m, smoked a cigar, and read the Manchester Guardian until 9 a.m. He would take orders up to Mr. France, dictate replies and letters, and walk around the mill. The rest of the day was spent outside looking for orders. Much local business was done at the Field Cafe in Westgate or at the Huddersfield Liberal Club. For this textile business to survive this long, it had to face many challenges: the 2 world wars, slump in trade, the general strike. By adapting and changing methods of work, reinvesting in new machinery processes, and diversifying, it is still a thriving business today and celebrated its 125 years in 2018. The present-day director is Ian Hurst Brierley, the great-grandson of John L. Brierley. This advert from the Huddersfield Official Handbook, dated 1942, shows the products manufactured at the time. Over the years, they have produced fancy yarns, manufactured elastic webbing, and even smokers' pipe cleaners. One of the business decisions was to buy the mill across the road from W.H. Hurst & Son cotton spinners in 1925. This mill was built for Reuben and William Hurst in 1872, and we will come across Reuben Hurst again later in the trail. We only now need to turn round, and Carol will enlighten us about Turnbridge. So we're going to have a little pause now to have a look to see if there are any comments so far before Carol continues with the trail. So Frank, anything to say?
So there hasn't been any questions, but we've got a few comments. People really like the old images, blast from the past. There's been somebody commented that they'd like to bring in back the horse and carriages. They probably don't like the fumes of the diesel double-decker buses. So I think, you know, that's a consideration. We could bring it to the council meeting next time. But so far, we've seen that the textiles isn't just about the mill buildings, but it's so much more. It's the chemicals that went into it, it's the engineering industry that produced the machine, it's the workers that fueled the mills and the mill owners. And all these things together have actually boosted up the employability in Huddersfield back in the past.
I think it's fascinating as well, thinking about all the extraneous businesses that did come up around mills. For example, there were probably people working in small workshops or at home making the baskets that they kept all the bobbins in. There were people manufacturing the shuttles and the reeds, and in Huddersfield there was a lot of card clothing manufacturer, and I've read about a lot of people putting all the little wires into pieces of leather or I think sometimes they're fabric, but usually leather, to go onto the rollers for carding the fleeces. It's fascinating, all the industry that's connected, not just spinning and weaving.
And one question that has just come in, Jonathan Hepworth is asking, and now I think he's trying to catch me up on the pronunciation because we've had a conversation. But okay, so he's saying, what is worsted and why did Huddersfield specialise in it?
Worsted yarn is made by fibres which sometimes were longer fibres, and the wool is spun in such a way that the fibres are in line together and it's much smoother. So it makes a nice, smooth, hard, crisp fabric, rather than the kind of woolen yarn you might use to make something bouncy like a jumper or a blanket. And the worsted cloth is the kind of lovely fine cloth with very subtle patterns in it sometimes that's famous for men's suiting, which is still made by a few firms in this area, isn't it, Julie, I think?
Yes, it is. Yes,
Yeah.
still, yes, yeah.
So I think it is now time to move into part 2. We've had one person wanting to more about workers' housing, and I think that question will actually be answered in part 2. So I'll just ask Lorna to share screen.
Yeah, I'll do that now. And here Carol will carry on from Turnbridge.
The bridge that we see at the bottom of Quay Street was built in 1865, and it's quite a distinctive feature on the Huddersfield Broad Canal. According to a book celebrating the centenary of John L. Briley, the original bridge crossing the canal at this point was a turning bridge, giving the area its name of Turnbridge. The whole of the area was representative of the industry built up around the growth of textiles, as well as several large and small mills. There were boiler works, chemical works, kilns, ironworks, machine works, dye works, millwrights, brass founders, etc. They all provided equipment or services for the demands of the rapidly growing industry. One of the examples of this is Reed Holiday's dye works. By the age of 21, Reed Holiday had established himself in business at Tanfield, just off Leeds Road. He had seen a gap in the market for ammonia products to clean the raw wool. Previously to this, stale human urine had been used, which, as you can probably imagine, was a bit messy. Reed also saw the potential of using a waste product from the Huddersfield Gas Light Company, ammoniacal liquor. After a few years on Leeds Road, the business moved here to Turnbridge, following complaints of the smell and pollution created by the processes that he was using. His greatest achievements were in producing dyes and the colouring processes. Another link to the textile industry came in the 1850s, producing benzene for degreasing and spot removal of textile fabrics. Reed Holiday retired in 1868, but the firm continued. It became Reed Holiday and Sons. At this point in time, the company was the leading manufacturer of dyes in England and the first international manufacturer of synthetic dyes. Towards the end of the 19th century, the firm employed 1,500 people, and the business covered a circular area of 2 miles here at Turnbridge. The nature of holidays changed when the government, following the concerns about the shortage of explosives during World War I, created British Dyes Limited, which later became Imperial Chemical Industries, better known as ICI. As we return to the bridge itself, one of the main instigators in changing to the present bridge was the owner of Turnbridge Ironworks, Richard Armitage. He realised that with ever-increasing productivity, increasing traffic flow, and especially the weight of vehicles, the bridge would need to be replaced. That bridge is what remains here today and is referred to as the Locomotive Bridge. The design is quite unique and is listed under the Schedule Ancient Monument Scheme. Originally, The 1865 bridge was moved by a windlass system of wheels, chains and weights, and it was operated by hand. It is quite rare and rises vertically to let the boats pass underneath. In 2002, it was converted to electricity and now operates by pressing a button and allows the canal boats to pass through. For anyone interested, you can see the bridge in action on YouTube.
Before we move away from Turnbridge, we're going to have a look at this aerial photograph, which shows us an example of workers' housing all along the side of the canal. These houses were built by the Huddersfield Corporation. Normally, houses had been built by mill owners very near to the mills, and workers had no excuse for being late. Carol's grandma would relate to her that if you were late, the gates were locked and you didn't get paid. These houses were built between 1880 and 1882 under the Artisans and Labourers Dwellings Improvement Act and referred to as artisans' dwellings. A full description of these houses can be found on the Huddersfield Exposed website. The streets were named Violet, Rose, Hope, Lily and Daisy. The 1911 census reveals a variety of occupations for workers who lived there: textile workers, warehouse men, chemical workers, labourers, painters and decorators, to name but a few. This 1911 census return of the Turner family shows them living at 21 Rose Street. We have 11 persons living in 4 rooms, and 5 of the household are employed in different trades of the textile industry. We have a dyer's labourer, a roller coverer, a cotton hank winder, a doffer, and an assistant beamer. We are now going to walk along the towpath and under the bridge, avoiding crossing the very busy Wakefield Road. And here are some photographs to show you the steps down under the tunnel, a little walk under the tunnel, and coming out at Sir John Ramsden's Court, our next stop.
This warehouse, facing Wakefield Road, is on the side of the Sir John Ramsden Canal, now called the Huddersfield Broad Canal. It's one of the oldest industrial buildings still standing in Huddersfield. And if we go down onto the towpath, we can see the loading bays on the side of the building. It dates back to the 1770s, being described as new in 1778 and belonging to a Mr. Atkinson. It must have been a very busy place during the height of the canal transport era. And here we can see 2 broad barges being loaded or unloaded. It's at this point that the Broad Canal joins the Huddersfield Narrow Canal, which opened in 1798 as far as Marsden. And in 1811, when the Stanage Tunnel was completed, this open transport links up to Lancashire. The difference in the width between the 2 canals meant that the goods had to be transferred from one width of canal barge to the other one, necessitating all these warehouses down here. And here we can see one of the winches that was used for taking the goods off the canal barges and for winching them back on again. The building avoided being demolished along with many other buildings in the surrounding vicinity when Wakefield Road was widened in the 1970s. The building was made into flats at one point, but it is now part of the University of Huddersfield campus and is called the Sir John Ramsden Court.
So a short step from the canal towpath, we are on Firth Street. We'll first have a little look at the 1850s Hardy's map, where we can see no development has begun at all. We have the river and we have the canal. If we now look at the 1887 Ordnance Survey map, we can now see Firth Street nestled between the river and the canal, with mills built all along its length. Some of these mills have now been demolished, but we are fortunate that we can still see Larchfield Mill, First Street Mill and Commercial Mill. All of these are fine examples of mid-19th century textile mills. So on this 1930s aerial photo, we can see Larchfield Mills and First Street Mills in the centre of the picture. Both mills are Grade II listed steam-powered woolen mills that were constructed between 1865 and 1866. They are fine examples of fireproof construction that had been developed in the early 1800s using cast iron pillars and beams supporting the floors on brick arches. This construction was used to help in the resistance of fire and also enabled heavy machinery to be housed on all floors. These 1902 pictures are from another mill in Lockwood, but give us an idea of the working processes that were carried out inside these two mills. Our first picture shows spinning and drawing frame. The second picture shows us the warping mill. And our third picture shows a jacquard loom, which would have been used for making patterned cloth. Larchfield Mill was built for George Brooke Jr. He began manufacturing plain worsted cloth and moved into fancy worsted trade. He was also involved in using new dyeing technology. In 1873, when a new reagent for indigo dyeing had been developed, and the local firm of Reed Holiday and Sons were producing it, a newspaper reported on a literary and scientific society's meeting where a piece of worsted cloth was exhibited, and it quoted, "Mr. Brooke has turned his long experience in indigo dyeing to account in bringing this process to its present state of perfection." The census records show that the business grew from employing 300 workers in 1871 to 750 workers in 1881. First Street Mills was built by Thomas Firth, a Quaker and a great man of charity. This mill was first leased to Benjamin Lockwood, a woolen manufacturer. When the lease came up again in 1886, it was taken over by Reuben Hurst and Sons, cotton spinners, doublers and warpers. We mentioned Reuben Hurst at Key Street, where he had been in partnership with his brother William. Reuben added weaving sheds in 1889, but he reverted to just spinning in the 1920s. The mill changed hands again in the 1930s to Fred Lawton and Sons, a well-established business, manufacturing woolen carpets, blankets and weaving yarns. They stayed here until 1989 and the mill remained empty. Both mills were bought by Huddersfield University in the 1990s and have undergone extensive and sympathetic conversions to maintain their heritage. Larchfield Mills is now known as the Hazlitt Building and First Street Mills is now known as the Sparks-Jones Building. Both buildings house the School of Computing and Engineering. Here we have a photograph of the new Barbara Hepworth building. And this is the University's School of Art, Design and Architecture, which includes fashion and textiles. It sits just behind First Street Mill. History and the future, side by side.
Well, thank you very much for all that, Julie. Well, here we are at the far end of First Street, where it meets Queen Street South. And built right on the corner is Priestroyd Ironworks. It was built in 1835 for John Hague and Sons, and they were machine makers and iron founders. This was an expanding industry built around the needs of the textile mills for large, complicated machinery as processing material evolved very quickly. Here we can see an advert for John Hague and Sons with a carding machine pictured in the centre. They produced a wide range of other textile machinery, and it was said that almost every town in England had a machine from the Hague factory. Other machines included a hopper feeder, self-acting teaser, a wool plucker, Scotch feed machine, and a Fearnought machine, which was used in the production of thicker fabric, such as material for coats. John Higgs used the ground floor of the building, and they leased the remaining floors out to other textile companies. And here we can see an advert for Thomas Shaw and Sons at Priestroyd Mills. When the mill was renovated and made into 190 apartments in 2004, it was called 1535, the melting pot, acknowledging its earlier use as an iron foundry. 1535 is the temperature at which iron melts. Right then, for our last port of call on the trail, we're going to go round the corner and up Queen Street South to the top, where we will find the Central Ironworks and Thomas Broadbent and Son Limited. This company may be quite unique in remaining within the same family and on the same site for 150 years. In 1864, Thomas Broadbent, an engineer, established a business with just 6 employees, carrying out general engineering jobs and maintaining and repairing textile machinery. Broadbent's inventiveness led to a patent in 1875 for the first steam-driven hydro extractor. This removed water from washed wool much more efficiently and speedily than before. It immediately became a huge success, and Thomas went on to adapt the centrifugal technology to other fields, including chemicals, sugar production, minerals, and laundry. Thomas died aged only 47, and unusual for the time, Thomas's wife Helen ran the business until the eldest sons William and Horace were old enough to take over. In his obituary, he is described as a most able scientific investigator. And here we see the Thomas Broadbent and Son insignia carved in stone. The business remains in the Broadbent family, as we say, with Simon Broadbent. It grew very rapidly and has changed with the times and has an international reputation for quality. Before centrifugal processes were developed, the removal of water from the washed wool had been done by wuzzing machines. And in the clothier's time, it was carried out by hand. The washed wool was placed in a basket. A pole was put through the handle, and the pole was pushed against a stone doorway or wall, and it was spun round as quick as possible, or to use local terminology, it was wuzzed. Eventually, a hole was worn away in the stone, and these were referred to as wuzzing holes. Obviously, no need to go to the gym in those days.
Thank you, Carol, for that very interesting story about the wuzzing holes. And that is now the end of our trail. So we hope that you've enjoyed our little selection of the sites around Huddersfield. And have there been any questions,
there are
Frank?
a few. So we've had a comment by Roger Armitage who's saying J.L. Brierley used to run the new machines for 3 years, then install new, which would save on the maintenance. So I think it just relates to the fact that the company has actually survived up to this date and about the efficiency of their processes. But one question here by Jane Hugh, who says, my great-grandfather, Thomas Henry Dyson, was a woolen warehouse man for fishers in Huddersfield. What would his work consist of? Can anyone answer that?
I wonder whether some of it would have been a bit like the modern warehouse work. In the warehouses around Huddersfield, you'd probably have stored all the raw materials. So the fleece, the prepared wool, the yarn, and of course fleece would come from all over the UK and sometimes abroad as well. They ended up importing Spanish wool and wool from other places. But then And of course, there were so many different fibres used. But you do see pictures. There are on the Kirklees Image Archive a lot of pictures of different buildings, and they include pictures of warehouses like the ones at Thomas Broadbent's in Lockwood. And you can see the completed cloth piled high in bales and the raw materials piled high in bales. I've been inside a spinning mill in Birkby in Huddersfield, Stork Brothers, which is part of a Chimera yarn weaving company, and they have huge bales and containers full of all the fibres that they mix together, and it's fascinating to see how they would have combined fibres before spinning them and blended them to make different colours or different strengths or thicknesses or textures.
Okay.
There's been a lot of inventiveness locally. And there
That's
still is inventiveness. Can I just mention, there is still like a textile centre of innovation in Huddersfield. And I've heard about all sorts of clever fabrics that have DNA on them, so you can trace where they come from, or that have funny technical abilities, all sorts of interesting things.
that's amazing.
Mhm.
So we've got another comment saying, I'm guessing Huddersfield was a smelly place to live and work. I'm obviously too young to remember that. So maybe Julie would like to comment on that.
Well, yes, a lot of the processes did create a lot of noxious fumes and smells. One of the reasons why I think Reed Holidays had to move. But all of the innovations that were created helped to create a much cleaner atmosphere as innovation moved on.
In the height of the textile business booming, they would of course have used a lot of coal, and there are lots of coal mines in the vicinity of Huddersfield that would have provided that, and of course all the carbon and the steam engines and things would have created a lot of pollution then, and it took quite a while for Huddersfield, which grew so fast, to put in place sort of better facilities and better sewerage and drainage and healthier places for people to live. It is much contrasting now. It's much better than it was, isn't it, Julie?
Yes, indeed.
So we've got some great comments coming in. Jackie de Carteret is saying, very interesting. Took me all the way back to school days in the late 50s, early 60s. A real trip down memory lane. Thank you. And Stan is saying, so it is not just about the past. Good to hear about the present day continuity of some of this stuff.
Yes, indeed.
So I think at that point we can perhaps talk about the organizations and images that we've used to support the trail.
Could I mention Kirklees Image is kirkleesimages.org.uk, and you can have a look on that and see lots of images of the Kirklees area, which includes Huddersfield. And of course, Huddersfield Exposed is a really good website with lots of links and information on there. Also, there's a wonderful site created by Alan Brooke called Underground Histories, which has a lot about the social history, political history, and the mills around. And then if you wanted to find out about what's going on nowadays, there is a woveninkirklees.co.uk website, because the Kirklees area is having a woven festival again. There was one in 2019 and there's one planned for June 2021. So let's hope that by June we can have quite a good festival. And the festival brings together both the industrial side of textiles and lots of local businesses, and also the students at the university, etc., and also people like myself who are just enthusiasts about fibre, yarn and textile crafts. So it's quite a good festival for everybody to be involved in. We should mention the museum. Carol,
yes, the Colne Valley Museum at Golka obviously has lots of interesting exhibits about, you know, the beginning of the industry.
Mm.
So it's very
It's
when it can open, of course, when it can open again.
when it can open again. It's run by volunteers at weekends, but you can see quite a lot of equipment like looms and an early spinning jenny, and find out what it must have been like to live in like a weaver's cottage.
Yes, yes.
Okay, and we would also like to invite people who have ideas about future walks to come forward, and we'll be happy to work with them. I think there is a great potential for future walks, also textile walks, because this has just been scratching the surface, and we could have Colne and Home Valley Textile Trail or Heavy Woolen Districts Textile Trail, Batley and Dewsbury. So please contact us. This is our email at the bottom of the screen, and we'll get back to you, and we're happy to help you develop with us some more textile trails, some more sequels. And if you are walking the streets, just wander off your path, your normal path, and look out for some of these exciting sites that there are. Pick up the Discover Huddersfield printed trail and try and see the Huddersfield town and also the whole of Kirklees for all its diversity. And now, thank you very much to our presenters, especially Julie Mahoney, Carol Hardy, and Lorna Brooks, and would like to say goodbye. Thank you very much for watching.
Yeah, thank you for watching.